Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Julie Byrne called Not Even Happiness. So I've talked in the past about the whole white guy with acoustic guitar subgenre. Hell, it seems like most music critics on YouTube have at least cited it at this point, not for the first time for me. And I think like most of us who regularly use the term, we're kind of obliged to explain our interpretations of it at some point. Now for me, my distaste tends to come from a certain languid, lazy, and yet overly polished and sanitized brand of it that doesn't aim to push into any interesting lyrical or instrumental directions, and simply serves to fill a very safe, middle brown niche, calculated to the point where it undercuts any sense of feigned sincerity. But that is not dismissing acoustic-leaning indie folk, because while there are a considerable share of stuff that will definitely tilt into that style and lane, usually you see it with a little bit more flexibility and innovation than you get in the mainstream, which can definitely add some real color to these songs. I might have many issues with Mark Kozelek, but he's a distinctive enough auteur lyrically and instrumentally that I would never outright discount him under this label. Now similarly, while there are fewer of them, I would also argue the label can apply to women as well. They aren't immune to bland artistic bankruptcy, believe me. But again, it's not to discount the ones that opt to push into more interesting directions. Take Julie Byrne. Going back through her debut album on Bandcamp, you could make the argument that the quiet domesticity and small details would make for the sort of material that I would otherwise find kind of tedious, and yet, while I'd be lying to say that any of her work was really all that exciting, I found myself mostly liking the filmy cassette quality and muted somber tones of that 2014 debut album Rooms with Walls and Windows. There was a distinctive homegrown texture to the instrumental tones in her delivery that did have a certain amount of charm to it, and while I was never entirely hooked, I did find a fair amount to actually appreciate. She aimed to follow it up this year with Not Even Happiness, which, yes, was promising a cleaner sound, which raised some concerns for me, but hey, maybe it'd be interesting, right? Well, okay, it was interesting, and the weird thing is that on the first 4 or 5 listens, it didn't seem to be. It was cleaner, the textures were less interesting than her debut. The very low-key and muted presentation put me in the mind of too many singer-songwriters who play for a very similar type of stripped-back, earthy elegance. We've heard this sort of sound done before, but when I started digging into the lyrics, well, I wouldn't say the album got precisely better, but there was a lingering sense that there was a little bit more here than initially meets the eye. I still do not love this project by any stretch of the mind, but I definitely hear the appeal. I get why people like this. So okay, let's start off with the instrumentation and production, and really not a huge amount to say. On her debut, there was a filmy, slightly ethereal tone to how the textures in her guitar and atmosphere blurred and blended with her voice, and yet for the most part this album does away with that, aiming for cleaner, squealing guitar pickups, hints of more elegant and opulent backing textures in the far distance, and of course Julie Byrne's vocals close to the front of the mix, with only a hint of reverb to intensify that lonely intimacy. Make no mistake, it's a much more conventional tone and approach with the sound, with each piece feeling slightly more isolated, and with the slightly quicker tempo in the guitar work, it implies there's a little bit more momentum to this project. I can definitely see this being a lot more accessible, and yet there's a part of me that's not really enamored with this. Byrne's delivery is very husky and quiet, which yes is the natural fit for this sort of production, but that doesn't exactly lend itself to hooks that will grab you with any sort of intensity. But of course, not the point. This is meditative, it's mood music. Hell, if you strip out some of the new age touches and some of the airiness, it very much has the feel of an acoustic Enya project unplugged, especially in some of the more ghostly backing vocals. As such, if you wanted to stand out, you're going to need to rely on lyrics or distinctive melodic tones. And while we'll get to the former in a minute, the latter, okay, outside of an interlude that really does feel like empty air, there are a few potent moments that I somewhat appreciated. I like the hints of arranged instrumentation behind Follow My Voice, the cloudy pan flute, soft backing vocals, and hints of organ behind Melting Grid, the deep swells of the layers on Natural Blue, the ghostly coos of Sea As It Glides, and the ethereal touches that fill up the languid synthesizers that drive I Live Now as a singer. Now, on the other hand, she also has an odd habit of some surprisingly jerky melodic and tempo transitions, like on Sleepwalking or Morning Dove, or the very abrupt ending of All the Land Glimmered Beneath, which certainly did not help the flow of an album like this, and really flow is quintessential. Of course, with this sort of minimalism, a lot still hangs on the writing, and this is where this album gets simultaneously interesting and kind of frustrating. For as much as, on the surface, these are love songs, Byrne's style of writing doesn't exactly make them easy to follow or trace through any sort of coherent narrative, which, of course, part of the point. When the details do show up, they're small and pastoral as the poetry curls around them. It's the point where you get the impression that she's trying to untangle the songs in mid-song too, which again, part of the point, and even links into the underlying themes as she slowly tries to unpack her emotions and feelings. There's not a coherent narrative because processing love and solitude and the tangled web of contradictions that come between Julie Byrne pursuing her passion in art on the lonely road and relationships with others in a more of an established place, well, that's not a narrative process. And for as much as I can appreciate this parallel in form and function, the parallels between pursuing love and pursuing art, that's a little shakier. Take Follow My Voice, where she expresses concerns that both in love and art she may be misunderstood, and in a desire to correct this, she'll overcompensate and not be true to her authentic self. Thus, she opts to share and trust more in that love, and yet I can't help but see the irony behind her usage of her abstraction, because it makes songs like this very difficult to decode and pretty easy to misinterpret. Don't get me wrong, when you do get a handle on the ideas of these songs, they go for some beautiful territory. The loneliness that comes in art and love that's not understood or properly reciprocated on Melting Grid, the poignancy of the really quiet moments on Natural Blue when it comes out on tour, and especially on The Closer, where she confronts that despite continuously leaving for newer pastures, she still hasn't fully processed what's going on within that her compelling her to continue to leave. Though it is kind of telling in the final lines that she does seem to have found someone who will, despite it all, remain honest with her, and whether it be her love or her audience, well, in a neat way, they both can kind of apply. And yet, all the while, I can't help but get the impression that both in the theme and execution, the writing is just overthought, or at the very least reflects Byrne's difficulty in getting to a deeper point. I get trying to capture those complicated, solitary moments and the difficulties that come in opening up and revealing more of yourself, and that places that understanding in the hands of somebody else, and you can't control that. But it's not like Byrne is making it easy on herself or the audience, which seems to manufacture a certain artificial distance that might feel more comfortable for her, but doesn't resolve anything. Byrne has confirmed in interviews something of a cyclical nature of the themes on this album, trying to give of oneself and open up and trust, and by the end of the album, she's still doing a lot of the same, with the biggest shift coming in a subtle acknowledgement of trust from the other side. And yes, that's also a major thematic component here. The little details and the choices and trust that can mean the world to somebody, but it really feels like progress by inches, feeling so much more like she summons up so much courage to pass an obstacle that should be the baseline of any expression of love or confessional art, and the impact kind of feels muted for me. And it's not like I'm not familiar with this sort of naturalistic circular writing or progression either. The same sort of nomadic musings colored much of Bill Callahan's quietly brilliant 2013 album Dream River, and there was similar structural conceits and pastoral imagery on Joanna Newsom's magnificent 2015 album Divers, but in both cases, through either understated directness or intricately gorgeous construction, they ended up carrying so much more weight than me than this. As such, okay, look, I get why Not Even Happiness has an audience, but I think I might admire parts of this record a lot more than I like it. I gave this album over a dozen listens for it to really resonate with me, and while there are indeed moments, the compositions aren't sticking, and the ideas don't resonate as deeply as I would like. As I said, it's good for sure. It's getting a strong 6 out of 10 from me, but given my own preferences for atmospheric or mood music, it's good, but I appreciate it more than I outright like it. And you know what? That's me being very open and very honest. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got a link down in the description below if you guys want to buy the album, if it caught your fancy at all. And if you guys want to see more or potentially get more involved in my polling process and tell me how wrong I am, there's the poll right there. Have fun. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want me to get to all the albums that have piled up on my schedule and I haven't had a chance to yet, the link to my Patreon is right there. That's where the albums and that's where my schedule is. 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule to get those albums up the list, and once a week you guys get to add records to that schedule. And even potentially movies. There's one movie sitting on there right now. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.